Very good. Any other questions from the audience? We've just got a couple questions that they're prepared to answer, but I kind of want to open it up to you folks. We've got about 20 minutes left in our Q&A session here, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time to be able to travel here this afternoon and evening. So are there any questions from the crowd? And Kathy has a few of them. This probably is more for Dr. Weaver here. Can we get an EBV on a crossbred animal or an animal that has an unknown breed?
So it's a challenge. So our current genetic evaluation system is not able to account for those heterosis numbers. So that's the problem. There are some crossbred individuals in the evaluation. The challenge becomes we know those crossbreds are going to perform a little bit better than purebreds just because of heterosis. And so all that can kind of be worked out with time and some progeny records. But it is a challenge, and generally in most cases, we encourage the purebred animals to be recorded and submitted. But there are some crossbred individuals there. But by and large, the majority of data in our system is from purebred animals.
Very good. Anybody else from the audience? Yes, sir.
I guess my question is, so during lactation, do you think just high energy is better than feeding a protein supplement, protein pellet, converting just for milk and keeping in body condition?
Okay, so you're asking
corn and
what is the rest of the ration you're talking about?
What was that?
What is the rest of the ration?
Lactation.
I mean, I guess it just depends on what your base diet is. You need adequate protein and energy to, make use milk well. They can be allowed to lose a little bit of body condition during lactation, right? So you'd like to see, your total diet. I guess I think about that the best you can. For twin pregnant ewes, you want to see a crude protein in the 14.5, maybe 15, actually probably closer to 15, be an economic return in terms of lamb growth. Energy needs to be reasonably high too, but like most of the rations you design for sheep, they should be like a TDN of about 65. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question. So depending on your forages and the rest of your diet, you may need to add an energy or protein supplement. I'm not quite sure what the base of the diet is, right? Yeah. They need to be balanced though. You can't really, if there's one time in a sheep's life though, there's two times in a sheep's life when it needs extra protein in a diet. And that is immediately post-weaning. And that doesn't necessarily need to be as much as sometimes we think. And then during lactation. If you're going to hold your protein and put it to its best use, I would choose those 2 points. Yeah.
I think this rolls into a really nice question that we've got prepared for you guys, but due to the feed costs that we're experiencing right now and somewhat lower lamb costs, what are some ways or strategies that you folks have worked with producers to put together to reduce feed costs without sacrificing animal growth and health? We'll start with Richard and then go to Andrew.
Okay. Really, I can't think of any 2 magic solutions, except what we try to promote is, lots of different things. For example, extending grazing. I know it's not talking about confinement now, but grazing, cover crops, grazing crop residues, all those things are going to reduce your reliance on stored feed, right? So that's a primary. You can utilize some poorer quality feeds with, the right type of supplementation pattern, but I don't know. It's always an age-old question. I try to focus on cost savings with, cheaper grazing options if I can. But yeah, what do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, extending the grazing season was kind of the first thing I thought of, and then I reminded myself that we were here to talk about confinement system.
Right.
But that's one tool. I think also I like to think about nutrient supply and evaluating feeds as a cost per unit of nutrient. So I'll calculate, what's the dollar value per pound of TDN that I'm feeding? What's the dollar value per pound of crude protein? So if you know how much the feed costs per ton, and you get, a hay analysis done, and what percentage on a dry matter basis is TDN, what percentage is crude protein, you can do a little bit of math. and calculate, okay, this feed is going to be 25 cents per pound of TDN and 50 cents per pound of protein. And now, if I'm evaluating two different feedstuffs or two different types of hay, I can look at and say, okay, for every pound of energy that my ewes are getting, I can get that to them cheaper with this option over this option. Or if they need protein, if that's what's limiting, I can get them protein cheaper with this feed versus this feed. So I think that's one metric that can be utilized to help with some of that from an economic standpoint. I think minimizing your waste. So think about how you're feeding hay. If you're feeding hay, minimizing how much hay just ends up as bedding or waste getting thrown out of the barn. Making sure you get it through the ewe can be part of it as well. Reducing your hay loss and wastage there, whether it's in the storage phase or the feeding phase, can help get the most bang for your buck out of the hay that you are purchasing.
This isn't very helpful, but it is a challenging year because corn prices are really high. So in years when corn prices are low and forage prices are relatively high, you can substitute some corn, right? But right now you're kind of stuck. So that's why I feel a little stymied in this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, kind of going on the notion of that, as well as reflecting what both of you guys had presented today, what differences do you suggest, if any, between feeding market lambs versus feeding replacement ewe lambs? So what are the diets that you're looking for, especially to improve or upon some of those genetic efficiencies that you're working with?
Either way.
I guess the first thought comes to me is depends on the goals of your program, right? So if you're trying to, breed your ewe lambs at the youngest age possible, they do need to be fed to fit certain endpoints, okay? Basically, the general rule of thumb is for sheep to reach a high conception rate, they need to be actually about 70% of their mature size. So, that's a reasonable goal to look at. So when you look at that often means feeding them a lot like a market lamb, actually. So, but on the other hand, if you're not trying to achieve a really high conception rate at an early age, you can grow lambs more slowly and not feed them like market lambs. I typically choose a little more moderate growth rate for my sheep program. Partly, I don't mind having a slightly lower conception rate, thinking that maybe I'm selecting for animals that conceive earlier without pushing them so hard. So I use that. Some other people think the same thing, and it's not an original idea. So, but you do have to push them to have a high conception rate. So, there aren't another question I commonly get asked with that is there a deficit for pushing them too hard? Because there's a whole school of thought that if you push a ewe lamb too hard, she'll have a poor first lactation, right? And to a certain extent, that's true because they're going to lamb at a younger age if you push them hard, and they will probably not milk as well. But the penalty isn't really that great. They usually don't have a failure of lactation. So same with dairy cows. There used to be that thought, but it doesn't really hold up that much.
That was the same follow-up that I had. Are there any detriments, or what happens if you get those ewe lambs too fat, and do you burn them out? You hear a lot of people talking about burnout of those females. What's your experience with that?
One comment I'd make, I think this is more of a theory, okay? So I have to be careful how I say that than something I can prove, right? As an extension person, we don't do research on all this stuff. My field experience tells me, right? That's what I would rely on, is that I believe, and in swine, I think there's evidence for this, that if a ewe reaches puberty and cycles a couple times before she gets pregnant, she has probably a better pregnancy outcome in terms of, we see something called early dilation syndrome sometimes in ewe lambs where they don't fully dilate. We see poor lactation performance. And I think it relates to the number of, estrus cycles, because they will cause the mammary gland to grow and the reproductive axis, in theory, to mature a little bit. So you really don't want them to get bred on their very first cycle, right? So that's my thought. And so if we push conception off like a couple months, then like seven, instead of breeding them at 7, you see much better outcomes if you breed them at 9 or 10 months in my experience. But
Yeah, I get more of an experienced team as well. Those 13, 14-month-old yearlings, when they lamb the first time, seem to be a little bit more successful than the ones that lamb right at 12. And yeah, I think you just kind of have to. There's a great chart in the sheep production handbook that shows, relative, percent of mature body weight relative to age and when they're going to reach puberty and when they're ready to breed. And so it's like 70% of mature body weight, 7 to 8 months of age if we're shooting for 12-month-old individuals when they lamb for the first time. And so, determining what those goals are, and if that's your goal, okay, they lamb, it's April 1st and they weigh this much, and I need to breed them on this date and they need to weigh at least this much for me to have a reasonable success rate. What kind of performance do I need to see in those individuals, and what am I going to need to achieve that? And is that economically worthwhile to do?
Sorry,
I'll go for it.
Oh, I was just going to add one thing, and you just made me think of it a little bit. That it isn't a static thing. The relation, like sheep don't reach puberty at the same age. It's very much related to the season in which they were grown in. So photoperiod affects their puberty as well. So everything gets a little adjusted and gets a little complex when you do that. So like ewe lambs that are born in May will reach puberty at the very earliest stage. Ewe lambs born in January, a little delayed. Ewe lambs born in the fall might not reach puberty until the next season even. So that's kind of a complexity. When we look at goals of growing ewe lambs, we need to take into account season a little bit.
Yeah, those fall born, they can be a little bit they're great from the standpoint that they were born in the fall out of ewes that clearly bred out of season. But at the same time, they themselves, we often struggle to breed them again until the following fall. So if you're going to keep all your placements out of the fall and you're not going to breed them until they're 16 months old, or breed them as their yearlings and they're going to lamb for the first time when they're 16, 17 months old, there's no sense in feeding them super hard and throwing a bunch of money at them to get them big when you're going to be sitting on them for the next 6 months until they'll actually breed. And so lower your feed costs, grow them slow, and you can kind of target that weight at a later age.
Yeah, that changes things a lot. Exactly. Yeah.
This confusion over here. You're saying that the use greatest energy requirement is right after weaning. Some are thinking.
Oh no, not the ewes, the lambs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Well, because I remember one of your slides it had that as well, and so it's the lambs you're talking about, not.
Lambs have the greatest protein requirement.
I was talking about their protein requirements in their life. I mean, they have the greatest protein requirement when they're, 10 pounds of, when they're first born. It goes down continuously, but they're getting mom's milk. So in a diet, when they really need it is, in that early post, when they no longer have mom's milk. Yeah.
Or are they going to be finished that way? Do you make that decision before you've ever invested it, or based on the right now? And if you need to transition based off of where the markets are at, how would you arrange them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I teach my class. I start off the very first section topic we talk about in sheep production is marketing, because I think all of us are guilty of it. I'm guilty of it. I think we're all guilty of it. We love raising livestock. We love raising animals. We love being out in the barn and feeding them and taking care of them. And we're all guilty of, we get to this point where we're like, oh, we've got these lambs or these ewes, and I suppose it's time we need to think about selling them. And sometimes that time point is past when we should have sold them. And so I think we need to start thinking about marketing before, if we're not in sheep production yet, we need to think about marketing before we even get into the business. And if we're already in the business, we think about marketing. I would think about it before you ever get used pregnant, before you ever turn rams out. We think about our ethnic markets these days, especially our Muslim holidays. We all know they move forward in the calendar year 10 to 14 days every year. And so it takes some forward thinking. If that's going to be our target, And if we know the holiday is this day, I actually want them at the sale about 2 weeks before that. And so we have to work backwards. I start at the market and think about, okay, I need lambs that are 70 pounds. And to get them to 70 pounds, they need to be 90 days of age. And so they need to be, if I'm going to market them 2 weeks before this holiday, which is, let's just say June 15th, and they need to be 90 days old. They need to be born by March 15th, which means they need to be bred in October, which means I need to think about getting breeding soundness exams done, reproductive vaccines done on my ewes by mid-September. So I'm back in early September thinking about generating the lamb crop that I'm hoping to sell into an ethnic market July 1st of the following year. So the earlier you can think about it, the better. But obviously things change, markets change within those time periods, and we need to be a little bit adaptable to all of that. I think the market and when you sell lambs and where you sell lambs is going to vary. It's going to be different on your operation than it is on our operation. In North Carolina, our kind of prime lamb market is 60 to 80 pounders. And that's where most of our buyers don't want anything over 80 pounds. Their goal is to sell a carcass that weighs less than 40 pounds. And so with the dressing percentage about 50%, really they don't want to buy lambs at over 80. And so we need to get those things out the door. By the time they reach that time point, 70, 75 pounds works pretty well. And so knowing the breeds you're raising and your breeding system and how long it's going to take them to reach that time point, all of it's, your management calendar is all dependent on that. So hopefully that answers some of your questions.
I'm not sure of anything much to add. That's a good answer. I think that the only thing I'd say is, like, if you were to analyze your markets over a 5-year period, you get a pretty good sense of which ones are the most lucrative looking at historical prices. And then I'd be flexible in making some changes when things don't look that way. The biggest mistake sometimes so if you were to focus on selling lambs at like 60, 80 pounds, you still have the option of selling. If that's a poor market, you still have the option of selling them as larger lambs if that looks good. Sometimes it does. The problem I always have is like a 40 or 50 pound lamb around Christmas. Because I'm always like, is this going to be, because you can't rethink that one, right? So I tend to be conservative and maybe market a few lambs that way and then try to push more of them to the most stable market. And if you analyze markets, you'll see this ethnic market, this less than 100 pound lamb market. Sometimes it's gone up to 110 pounds. It's been like a good profit point. Sometimes it's been 90, sometimes it's been 60. It varies a little bit. But the difference, we use the MSU lamb profit calculator. The difference between those is pretty subtle sometimes, the actual profit you make. As long as you gain some confidence using a tool like that, you can see like, lose $5 or gain $5. Those are both good decisions, though. You just don't want the one where you miss $50, right?
Yeah. You can also think about, if you're able to calculate cost to gain, know how much it costs for every pound that the lamb is gaining. If it costs $1.50 to put a pound of weight on my lambs, and I'm getting paid $1.80, I'll keep feeding them. I'm making 30 cents for every pound they gain. But if it costs me $1.80 to put a pound on that lamb, and the lamb's worth $1.30 at the sale barn, I'm going to get rid of those things as soon as I can, because I'm losing money every pound that they gain. So if you're able to calculate that, think about what you're putting into those individuals and feed every day. If you're able to take some weights on a somewhat consistent basis and know what their average daily gain is like, that weight, the weight can surpass those 60 to 80 pound ranges in a hurry if we're not careful. And we have several producers in North Carolina that they've got lamb even out on grass, marginal grass that they're developing, and they just figure, they're going to gain pretty slow, and then they bring them in the barn, and these things weigh 90 pounds. And I haven't put much into them, but I didn't think they were gaining much, and they surprised me, and now they all weigh 90 pounds, and no one wants them. And if we just took weights every couple weeks or every month, we get an idea for how fast those animals are growing and be able to better target that more specific marketing time point.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's why I kind of hesitate because it's so site dependent, right? In this climate, it's pretty hard to avoid mud spots. And so, you can, in some soils, probably withstand a certain amount of that. But that's why NRCS builds us these hard winter surface areas, right? So it's hard. Like, and if you, there are some producers in northern Michigan, for example, who do feed outside in winter at least. So winter is one thing, but mud season is tough, right? So I don't have a great solution for that. I think it can be somewhat site dependent. You might be able to, like my own farm, I feed outside a little bit that time of year, but I have to move animals off those areas pretty fast on a hard surface. So it's hard to count on a dirt lot for this climate. Yeah. Yeah, please. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Yep. Yep. Yeah, that's the hard surface area I was talking about. It doesn't necessarily have to be cement, just what Dr. Hunter said. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I would recommend, and there is the beauty of it is there is funding available from our government to establish some of those, kind of systems to protect waters. Mhm. That makes good sense. That seems like a pretty good system. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good compromise. There's a little cement in what he's describing, and a little lower cost feed pad that's not hard surface, but it's gravel that doesn't.
The only comment I would make is pay attention to particle size, right? You can get it to the point where it is too small. And if you get it mixed with mud, guess what? You've got all that sharp rock or that material that's stuck now in between the hoof, causing further irritation. Yeah, good comments.
Are you looking at it going more towards parachute, in terms of, say, engineering costs?
I think that's a loaded question. It's a good question. It's a loaded question. I'll say for our folks in North Carolina, the few that are using confinement systems, we have both. And so some producers look at it that it's really hard to find someone to shear sheep in North Carolina. And it's going to be really expensive. And so based on what it's going to cost, you probably have to shear twice a year in North Carolina to keep them cool. And so when you factor in twice a year shearing and take that off the top of any profit that you might raise or generate for you, that's a pretty substantial portion of what she might generate in a year. When you think about it might cost $10+ to get her shorn. And so we have some producers that are looking at it from that standpoint, and they've shifted more towards the hair sheep route and utilizing some hair sheep in that confinement system. The hair sheep may not be, in terms of total pounds of output, may not be quite as well as like a polypay. So you're going to have a little bit lighter litter sizes potentially. I'm not saying that's true for every hair sheep, but that's potentially the case. So that's something to keep in mind. The polypay, I think, is a pretty popular breed, especially in Midwest confinement systems that a lot of folks are using. It's a composite breed as well. Obviously they have to be shorn, as you all know, but they may be able to, their litter size is maybe a bit larger, but the ewe size is also going to be bigger because our hair ewes 130, 150 pounds. Those polypay ewes may be 170, 180 pounds potentially. So there's a lot to factor in and consider with that. And I think it's going to be very operation dependent.
I don't think there's a clear winner, except I would look at traits. I would look at body size and prolificacy. Yeah, shearing is a factor, right? But I think, and then I would encourage somebody probably to use crossbreeding system no matter what. And so with that, most of the successful commercial producers don't have a purebred ewe base. They try to maximize heterosis like Andrew was describing in his talk. So they have a crossbreeding system using like NSIP, like well-selected high value animals. But I think that's the winner. And then you have to look at your market. One slight advantage Welsh sheep might have is they tend to be a little bigger and maybe a little more flexible in their marketing. But on the other hand, when we're finding that 60 to 80 pound lambs year in, year out are the clear winners, maybe our ewes don't have to be so big. So I don't have a particular bias there, except if you want to be flexible and you want to also sell big lambs someday, it's a little easier for your ewes weigh 10, 15 pounds more. But you could do that with hair sheep too if you guys just started selecting them a little bigger. So
I mean, you can put a Suffolk buck on a Katahdin ewe and make a 135 pound market. Purebred Katahdins, it's going to take a lot to get them to 135 pounds. They're going to be pretty fat when they get there. But a Suffolk, terminal sire could work great to get them there. But yeah, like you said, I mean, if 135 pound is your market, if that's what you want to sell, probably a white face ewe like a polypay or something like that, crossed on a black face terminal sire, maybe your best option. Those composite breeds, like a polypay, a 4-weight composite breed, they'll retain about 75% of maximum heterosis. So even though they're a purebred breed, they're obviously recognized as a breed. They're a composite of 4 different breeds, and with that, they maintain some of that heterosis still. And it's about 75% of what that maximum is. So there's still opportunity to benefit from heterosis within using a sheep like a polypay.
Any other last minute questions for these gentlemen? And please feel free to catch them in the back.
Good question. And we don't know for sheep at this point. So in cattle, I showed the cattle values. It's 20, 25% in cattle. We don't know for sheep. We don't know. So my hope is that it's similar to cattle. That would be my hope, but I don't know.
Folks, let's put our hands together and thank these 2 gentlemen for coming today. What an opportunity to have 2 researchers from out of state to give their perspective. Again, we thank you guys, and feel free to catch them here in the next 5 or so minutes, unless they've really got to get out of here. So with that, I want to turn it back over to Roger if he's got any comments for us to wrap up, and it looks like Christine may as well. But you guys have some evaluation sheets on your table. As always, those are extremely helpful to help us understand what you guys need and how we can further assist you in the future. Christine, do you have a few words?